The HOA president called the sheriff on me for putting my own boat on my own lake on my own 500-acre ranch, but 8 minutes later, I owned their entire marina. 8 minutes. I'm watching that sheriff's cruiser disappear down my gravel road, dust clouds mixing with the smell of victory and fresh-cut hay. Behind me, sledgehammer strikes echo across the water, thunk, 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 as a bright red sold sign gets pounded into what used to be their precious lakeside estate's marina. How does someone go from having cops called on them to buying out their enemies in less time than it takes to soft-boil an egg? 2 words: paper trail. See, some people think being loud and obnoxious wins fights, but when you mess with a retired oil rigger who knows how to read contracts and isn't afraid to dig into public records, well, you might just find out that karma drives a foreclosure truck. What would you do if your HOA tried to control water rights on your own property? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet half of you have your own HOA nightmare stories. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started, because what happened next will make you want to check your own property deed tonight. My name's Garrett Thornfield, and 3 years ago I did what every oil rig supervisor dreams about after 25 years of 12-hour shifts and hurricane evacuations. I bought myself a real piece of Texas, 500 acres of rolling hills, native grass, and the crown jewel, a 12-acre spring-fed lake that's been here since before Texas was even Texas. This wasn't just any property purchase. We're talking about my family's entire life savings, plus my military disability settlement from a back injury courtesy of an IED in Afghanistan. Every penny we had went into this dream. The morning coffee steam mixed with lake mist while cattle lowed in the distance. That's the smell of freedom, folks, and the sound of a man's legacy being built. My wife, Diane, she's an elementary school teacher with the patience of a saint and research skills that would make the FBI jealous. Our daughter, Savannah, was 15, more interested in her phone than ranch life, but this was supposed to be her inheritance, her future. The previous owner was an old rancher named Earl who'd maintained that lake for 40 years. When I shook his weathered hand at closing, he said something that still gives me chills. "Son, that water's been running clean since before the Comanche. Your deed shows water rights clear back to 1847. Don't let nobody tell you different. Some folks get real creative about what they think they can claim." Should have listened closer to that warning. Enter Cordelia Blackstone. And yes, that's her real name, like some Disney villain who decided suburban warfare was her calling. Picture this: designer boots that have never touched actual dirt, always driving a white Range Rover that gleams like it's fresh off the lot, and perfume so overpowering it could knock a buzzard off a garbage truck from 50 yards. She'd moved from Dallas 6 months earlier when her husband Dwight, a city attorney who treats billable hours like a video game high score, bought into the new Lakeside Estates development next door. The development was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks identical and the HOA rules are thicker than a dictionary. Their lots backed up to my property line, and apparently, having a working ranch with actual livestock next door wasn't part of their suburban paradise vision. First time I met Cordelia, I was launching my little fishing boat, a 16-foot aluminum thing that came with the property. Nothing fancy, just perfect for catching bass on quiet Sunday mornings. The satisfying splash when the hull hit water, the creak of Earl's old wooden dock under my boots. This was what I'd worked my whole life for. That's when I heard car doors slamming and heels clicking on gravel like an approaching storm. Cordelia appeared at my property line like she'd materialized from a country club nightmare, phone already in hand. "Mr. Thornfield," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a residential area, not some swamp person's playground." Swamp person, real classy. I walked back to shore, keeping my military training in check. "Ma'am, this is my property, my lake, my boat. Everything here's legal and documented going back over a century." She started taking pictures like she was documenting evidence. "We'll see about that. This lake affects all our property values, and that contraption is completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood. You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney." The contraption was a fishing boat that probably cost less than her monthly spa budget. Within a week, I got a visit from a county code enforcement officer holding a clipboard full of papers that flapped in the Texas wind like surrender flags. Poor guy looked mortified as he explained someone had filed an anonymous complaint about unauthorized watercraft operation on my property. "Sir, I have to investigate every complaint," he said, mopping sweat from his forehead. "But between you and me, everything's legal here. Your water rights are ironclad, goes back to the original Spanish land grants." But the damage was done. Neighbors started talking. some apologetic. Cordelia doesn't speak for all of us. Others suddenly avoiding eye contact. My daughter came home asking why kids at school were saying we were lawbreakers causing neighborhood trouble. That night, staring out at my lake under the stars, I realized this wasn't about a boat. This was about something much bigger. And in my experience, people who abuse power like this usually have something very expensive to hide. 2 weeks later, Cordelia escalated from petty complaints to what I can only describe as psychological warfare with a legal twist. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about lake safety concerns. And here's the kicker. She invited the county sheriff under the pretense of a public safety discussion. Smart move, actually. Nothing says legitimate authority like having a badge in the room when you're spinning lies. I found out about this meeting from Buck Martinez, who owns the local hardware store and has ears in every corner of the county. Buck's one of those guys who's lived here 40 years, knows everyone's business, and sells more than just nails and paint. He deals in information. "Son," he said, leaning across his counter that smelled like motor oil and honest work, "that woman's got dollar signs in her eyes. She's asking too many questions about property values and lake access for someone who just wants quiet neighbors." The mini twist came in my mailbox 3 days later, an official-looking cease and desist letter on letterhead so fancy it could have been government stationery. The header read, "Lakeside Estates Community Standards Authority," which sounds official until you realize it's just the HOA dressed up in big words. The letter claimed I was in violation of community waterway standards and demanded immediate removal of my boat or face, escalated legal action. They even attached a copy of some made-up regulation about unauthorized wake generation in shared water resources. Here's your first knowledge nugget, folks. HOAs have exactly zero jurisdiction over private property outside their boundaries. That's like your neighbor's book club trying to tell you what to read in your own house. The takeaway? When someone sends you legal-looking papers, check if they actually have legal authority first. But Cordelia wasn't done. She claimed my boat created wake damage to the HOA's private dock, which was interesting considering they didn't have a dock yet. Just an empty shoreline and a lot of ambitious plans. I spent that evening on my computer, something I'd learned to do pretty well during those long nights on the oil rig. Turns out HOA bylaws are public record, and what I found made my blood pressure spike like a Christmas morning heart attack. The HOA was formed 6 months after I'd already bought my property. 6 months. These people were trying to impose rules on land that predated their entire neighborhood by 15 years. It's like moving next to an airport and then complaining about airplane noise. I pulled out my deed, my surveys, and my water rights documentation, all the paperwork that proved this lake had been part of working ranches since before the Civil War. Earl's words echoed in my head. "Don't let nobody tell you different about your rights." The next morning, I drove around the neighborhood with my camera, documenting everything. Some neighbors waved apologetically from their driveways. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow, actually walked over to my truck. "Mr. Thornfield, I hope you know not all of us support this nonsense," she said, glancing around like she was worried about surveillance. "That Blackstone woman doesn't speak for everyone. Some of us moved here for the peace and quiet, not to start wars with our neighbors." But others weren't so friendly. I could see curtains twitching, phones coming out to record me driving past. The psychological pressure was working. They were making me feel like the criminal for using my own property. That afternoon, Cordelia played her next card. She threatened to contact the state environmental agency, claiming my cattle drinking from the lake might contaminate groundwater that feeds into the county water supply. Never mind that cattle have been drinking from this lake for over a century without poisoning anyone. When Diane got home from school that day, she found me staring at a stack of legal papers spread across our kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene. "Honey," she said, setting down her teacher bag with that careful tone she uses when dealing with difficult parents, "maybe we should just talk to them. Find some compromise." Compromise? I looked up from a property survey dated 1847. "Diane, they're trying to steal our lake. This isn't about compromise. This is about them wanting something that doesn't belong to them." That's when I noticed it. While I'd been documenting their neighborhood, someone had been documenting mine. There were fresh tire tracks along my property line, and I'd caught a glimpse of a surveyor working near the fence line that morning. I called Buck that evening. "You said Cordelia was asking about property values. What exactly did she want to know?" The pause on the other end of the line was longer than a Texas summer. "Garrett, She asked me what I thought your place would sell for if you had to move quick. Said something about hoping it wouldn't come to that, but sometimes neighbors just aren't compatible. The smell of diesel fuel from my truck mixed with the evening air as I walked out to check my property line. That's when I found them. Small wooden stakes with orange flags driven into the ground about 20 feet onto my side of the fence. Someone was surveying my land, and they weren't being subtle about it. The mini twist hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut 3 weeks later when I found a letter from the Army Corps of Engineers in my mailbox. The Army Corps, these are the federal boys who regulate major waterways and dams. Getting a letter from them is like getting audited by the IRS and visited by aliens on the same day. Cordelia had filed a complaint claiming I'd built an unauthorized dam structure that was disrupting natural water flow. A dam, on a spring-fed lake that's been here since mastodons roamed Texas. The woman had somehow convinced federal regulators that my natural springs were actually illegal construction, but she wasn't stopping there. That same week, the county tax assessor showed up suggesting my property should be rezoned as commercial due to recreational watercraft operations. Suddenly, my family ranch might get hit with business tax rates that would make a casino owner weep. Meanwhile, I noticed construction equipment appearing on the HOA side of the property line. Big equipment. Excavators, concrete trucks, the kind of machinery that costs serious money to rent. They were building something, and they weren't being quiet about it. The psychological warfare was ramping up too. Anonymous complaints started flooding every government office in the county. Fire marshal got a tip about potential hazards from my diesel fuel storage. Health department received concerns about livestock waste contamination. Wildlife services heard rumors about me disturbing protected bird habitats. Here's your second knowledge nugget. A pattern of frivolous complaints filed simultaneously against the same person is actually evidence of harassment under Texas law. Document every complaint with dates and agencies. It shows coordination and malicious intent. The takeaway? Keep a harassment log because the pattern itself becomes your evidence. The real gut punch came when I discovered what they were actually building. I climbed up on my barn roof with binoculars, old military habit of getting the high ground, and saw concrete footings being poured right up to my property line. They were building a dock, a big one. But here's the thing about property lines, they're not suggestions. I pulled out my survey equipment, something every rancher learns to use, and discovered their dock anchors were 20 feet onto my land. 20 feet. That's not a mistake. That's theft. My trail cameras, which I'd installed after finding those survey stakes, captured the whole operation. Video footage of Cordelia directing the construction crew, pointing at survey markers, checking plans against my property. She wasn't just building on my land, she was supervising the invasion. Diane had been doing her own research, using those teacher skills that make her so dangerous with a computer. Late one night, she came into the kitchen with a stack of printouts and a look that meant trouble. "Garrett, I've been digging into adverse possession laws," she said, spreading papers across our table like a battle plan. "In Texas, if someone openly uses your land for 10 years without your permission, they can legally claim it." The coffee in my cup went cold as ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they're not trying to harass us into selling. They're trying to steal a piece of our property legally. That dock, those complaints, all of it, they're establishing a claim." That's when the community pressure really started building. The local newspaper ran an anonymous letter to the editor about inappropriate land use threatening neighborhood character. Some ranch neighbors started expressing concerns. Property disputes have a way of affecting everyone's values. Savannah came home from school that Friday with tears in her eyes and grass stains on her jeans. "Dad, kids are asking why you won't just follow the rules like everyone else. Why can't we just be normal neighbors?" That night, lying in bed listening to cattle settle down for the evening and the gentle lap of water against my dock, Diane voiced what we were both thinking. "Honey, maybe they'll just wear us down until we give up. The legal bills are already hitting $4,000, and we haven't even hired a real attorney yet." I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 25 years of oil rig work in my bones. "You know what I learned on those rigs, Diane? When something doesn't make sense, when the pressure readings are all wrong, you don't ignore it, you dig deeper." The next morning, Buck Martinez called with information that made everything click into place. "Garrett, you remember I told you Cordelia was asking about property values? Well, yesterday she asked me something different. She wanted to know what I thought your place would sell for the right price, if you were motivated to move quick." The smell of bacon grease filled our kitchen as Diane made breakfast, but my appetite was gone. "Buck, what aren't you telling me?" "Son, I've been selling hardware to contractors for 40 years. Yesterday, I sold dock cleats and marine rope to a company called Lakeside Marina Development. They paid cash and asked about bulk pricing for a major waterfront project." I hung up the phone and walked out to my dock where morning mist was rising off the water like ghosts of old ranchers. The construction noise from next door was getting louder every day, but now I understood what they were really building. They weren't just harassing me into selling. They were building their dream on my land, one illegal anchor point at a time. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway on a Tuesday morning while I was feeding cattle, kicking up dust clouds that mixed with the smell of hay and impending legal disaster. Deputy Rodriguez stepped out looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, holding what looked like an arrest warrant. The mini twist that nearly knocked me flat: they had a warrant for illegal watercraft operation in federally protected wetlands. Federal. Protected. Wetlands. My family's spring-fed cattle pond was now apparently a critical habitat requiring government protection. "Mr. Thornfield," Deputy Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of a man forced to enforce stupidity, "I need you to remove that boat immediately. We've received documentation that this lake contains endangered species habitat." Cordelia appeared like she'd been waiting in the wings of a bad theater production, smartphone in hand, filming everything for what she called evidence documentation. She was wearing those spotless designer boots again, and had brought backup. 3 other HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be at a country club than a working ranch. "Officer, as you can see, Mr. Thornfield has been flagrantly violating federal environmental protection laws," Cordelia announced, producing a folder thick enough to choke a horse. "We have official environmental assessments proving this lake harbors a rare species of turtle that requires watercraft-free habitat." The deputy impounded my boat right there in front of God and everybody, loaded it onto a trailer while Cordelia filmed like she was directing a documentary about environmental crime. The humiliation burned worse than summer asphalt, especially when she made sure to get shots of my daughter watching from the kitchen window. That afternoon, the story hit the county newspaper with a headline that made my teeth grind: "Local rancher cited for environmental violations." They used my name, mentioned the ongoing investigation, and painted me as some kind of reckless polluter who didn't care about protected wildlife. But here's where military training pays off. When someone attacks you with fake documents, you call in your own experts. I had a buddy from my Army days, Dr. Jake Thurman, who'd become an environmental consultant after his service. One phone call brought him out to the ranch with equipment that could identify every living thing in that lake down to the microscopic level. Jake spent 2 days testing water samples, cataloging wildlife, and examining every inch of shoreline. His findings made Cordelia's official documentation look like a middle school science project written in crayon. "Garrett," he said, pulling off his waders after the final survey, "there are no endangered species here, no protected status, no federal jurisdiction whatsoever. What you've got is a healthy freshwater lake with common bass, catfish, and regular pond turtles that couldn't be more ordinary if they tried." Here's your third knowledge nugget. When someone produces environmental assessments, demand to see the original source documents and verify the credentials of whoever signed them. Forged environmental reports are actually federal crimes. The takeaway? Always get independent verification of any official documents used to threaten your property rights. Jake's written report was a thing of beauty. 12 pages of scientific analysis that systematically destroyed every claim in Cordelia's fake assessment. Better yet, he'd found something interesting in her documents: forged signatures from state environmental officials who'd never heard of my property. The community was splitting down the middle like a rotten fence post. Original ranch families started bringing casseroles and offering help with legal bills. But the HOA-controlled residents crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. Local businesses had to choose sides. The feed store posted a "Support Local Ranchers" sign, while the fancy coffee shop near the HOA development suddenly wouldn't return my calls. The financial pressure was crushing us like a hydraulic press. Legal bills had hit $8,000 and climbing. I'd missed 2 days of ranch work dealing with environmental investigators. Our insurance company started asking uncomfortable questions about ongoing legal disputes and whether they'd still cover liability claims. Diane was keeping it together during the day, teaching her elementary kids like nothing was wrong, but I could hear her crying in the bathroom some nights. Savannah asked if she could transfer schools. The gossip and questions were becoming unbearable. "Dad," she said one evening while we watched the sunset over our embattled lake, "why don't we just give them what they want? It's just a boat." That's when I realized they'd almost won. They'd made my own daughter question whether fighting for our rights was worth the pain they were causing our family. The final straw came that Friday. I was checking my trail cameras when I found something that made my blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks along my property line and video footage of men in suits walking my shoreline with measuring equipment. Not surveyors this time. These guys had the look of appraisers or developers. That night, while Diane graded papers and Savannah did homework, I sat on my dock listening to the gentle lap of water against wood and the distant hum of construction equipment. The smell of diesel fuel from their machinery carried on the evening breeze, mixing with the natural scents of cattle and hay. Buck Martinez called just before bedtime. "Garrett, I've been asking around about that Marina company. Found something you need to know." "What's that, Buck?" "They're not just planning to build a marina, son. They're planning to build it right here, on your lake." Diane's discovery came at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, when normal people are sleeping and only teachers with insomnia are digging through public records on county websites. I found her in our kitchen, laptop glowing in the darkness, surrounded by printed documents that looked like evidence from a federal investigation. "Garrett," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure and a murder weapon in the same hole. "You need to see this." What she'd found made every piece of harassment, every fake complaint, every legal threat suddenly make perfect sense. The HOA hadn't just filed incorporation papers when they formed their little suburban kingdom. They'd taken out a construction loan. A big one. $2.3 million. "Look at the collateral," Diane said, pointing to a line item that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Listed as security for the loan was future marina site with established lake access and infrastructure. My lake. They'd used my property as collateral for a loan they had no legal right to secure. The documents painted a picture of fraud so brazen it would make a con artist blush. The loan application described community-owned waterfront property with existing dock facilities and established recreational use. Every single word was a lie, but it had been enough to convince Lakeside National Bank to hand over millions. But here's where it got really interesting. The Marina Development Company listed as the borrower wasn't some faceless corporation. It was owned by Cordelia's brother, Marcus Blackstone, who'd been quietly buying waterfront properties across 3 counties using the same playbook. "They've done this before," Diane said, spreading out property records from 2 other counties. "Same pattern, move into HOA development, harass existing property owners, force sales at below market prices, then develop with borrowed money using the stolen land as collateral." The loan documents showed the payment schedule, and the numbers made my rancher's practical mind spin. They owed $147,000 every quarter, with the full balance due in exactly 90 days. Without access to my lake, they had no viable marina site. Without a marina site, they couldn't make payments. Without payments, they'd lose everything, including Cordelia and Dwight's personal guarantees. They weren't just trying to steal my land for spite, they were trying to steal it to avoid financial ruin. The bank's approval letter included a site inspection report that described established recreational facilities and demonstrated public access to my private property. Someone had convinced bank inspectors that my ranch was already operating as a public marina. "How did they even get the bank out here without us knowing?" I asked, staring at photos that clearly showed my dock, my boat, my property, all described as existing marina infrastructure. Diane's teacher instincts had found the smoking gun buried in the appendices. The site inspection had been conducted on a Tuesday in March, the same day I'd been called away to deal with a livestock emergency that turned out to be a false alarm. The same day, Cordelia had organized a community appreciation picnic right on my property line. They'd staged a fake emergency to get me off my land, then paraded bank officials through my property while hosting a party that made it look like public recreation area. The photos showed my dock crowded with people, boats tied up to my moorings, families picnicking on my shoreline, all carefully orchestrated to deceive loan officers. The financial pressure made perfect sense now. Every legal bill they forced us to pay, every day of work they cost me, every stress-induced sleepless night was designed to push us toward bankruptcy. Force the sale, acquire the lake access, validate the loan collateral, save themselves from financial catastrophe. "Garrett," Diane said, closing the laptop with the satisfaction of a hunter who'd tracked down her prey, "they're not just thieves. They're desperate thieves, and desperate people make mistakes." Looking at those loan documents spread across our kitchen table, I realized something that made me smile for the first time in months. They'd built their entire financial future on land they didn't own, couldn't legally access, and had no right to use as collateral. In exactly 90 days, reality was going to come calling with foreclosure papers. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First to Buck Martinez, then to Rita Espinoza, the retired county clerk who'd helped me research property records before, and finally to Dr. Jake Thurman. By noon, I had my war council assembled in Buck's feed store, surrounded by the honest smells of grain and leather, while we planned the takedown of a lifetime. "Folks," I said, spreading Diane's evidence across Buck's wooden counter that had witnessed 40 years of rancher deals, "we're not just fighting harassment anymore. We're stopping organized fraud." Rita's eyes lit up like Christmas morning when she saw the loan documents. After 30 years in the county clerk's office, she could smell financial fraud from 3 counties away. "Garrett, this is criminal conspiracy. They used false property ownership claims to secure millions in funding. Here's the beauty of having a retired government employee on your team." Rita knew exactly which agencies to contact and how to file complaints that wouldn't get buried in bureaucratic nonsense. Her first move was brilliant. File a criminal fraud complaint with the district attorney's office, a civil fraud report with the banking commissioner, and a federal complaint with the FDIC about fraudulent loan practices. "Always hit them from multiple angles," Rita explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd processed thousands of legal documents. "You file one complaint, they might ignore it. You file 5 different complaints with 5 different agencies, suddenly everyone's paying attention." Dr. Jake brought his environmental expertise and something even more valuable: military precision. He'd already prepared a comprehensive report debunking every environmental claim Cordelia had made, complete with photographic evidence and sworn affidavits from actual state environmental officials who'd never heard of my property. "But here's the real prize," Jake said, pulling out a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "I tracked down 2 other families in neighboring counties who went through identical harassment campaigns. Same fake environmental concerns, same pressure tactics, same mysterious Marina development company trying to force property sales." Buck's contribution was pure local intelligence. 40 years of selling hardware to contractors had given him a network that knew every construction project, every permit application, and every suspicious financial deal within 100 miles. "That Marina company applied for construction permits they never got approved," Buck said, checking notes scrawled on hardware store receipts. "They're building without permits, using borrowed money secured by stolen collateral on property they don't own. It's like a criminal masterclass in how to break every law simultaneously." Our evidence collection system was military-grade organized. Diane had created digital folders for every incident, cross-referenced with dates and documentation. Every harassment complaint, every fake legal threat, every trespassing incident was cataloged with timestamps that showed systematic coordination. The timeline was damning. Every escalation perfectly matched the Marina company's financial pressure. When loan payments came due, harassment intensified. When bank inspections were scheduled, fake emergencies materialized. When environmental approvals were needed, forged documents appeared like magic. "Look at this pattern," Diane said, pointing to her spreadsheet that looked like evidence from a federal investigation. "Every major harassment incident corresponds exactly with their loan payment schedule. They weren't just trying to steal our land. They were trying to validate fraudulent collateral in real time." Rita's investigation revealed the scope of their fraud extended far beyond my property. The Marina company had no business license, no legitimate insurance, no actual assets beyond the fraudulent loan. Cordelia and Dwight's personal financial guarantees meant they'd lose everything when the scheme collapsed. "Here's what we know," I said, feeling like a commanding officer briefing troops before a critical mission. "They owe the bank $147,000 quarterly, with full balance due in 68 days. Without our lake, they have no marina site. Without a marina site, they can't make payments. Without payments, they face criminal fraud charges and personal bankruptcy." Our strategic advantage was timing. Let them continue believing their plan was working while we built an overwhelming case. Every additional fraudulent act they committed strengthened our evidence file. Every day closer to their loan deadline increased their desperation and likelihood of making bigger mistakes. Jake suggested we quietly document their illegal construction activities. "Military surveillance principles apply here," he said with the grin of someone who'd spent years gathering intelligence in hostile territory. "Let them commit crimes while we film them doing it." The community support network was growing stronger daily. Original ranch families were organizing legal expense fundraising. Local businesses were choosing sides, and most were backing property rights over suburban bullying. Even some HOA residents were privately expressing concerns about their leadership's extreme tactics. "The beautiful thing about fighting fraud," Rita said, organizing evidence binders with the efficiency of someone who'd processed thousands of legal cases, "is that the truth has a way of surfacing at exactly the right moment." Our plan was elegantly simple. Let them continue their harassment campaign while we documented everything, then strike when their loan payment deadline created maximum financial pressure. Military timing combined with legal precision. "In exactly 68 days, I said, looking at my assembled team of local experts and loyal friends, "we're going to turn their own greed against them. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting criminals destroy themselves." The mini twist that made my blood run cold came on a Monday morning when I found my dock floating in pieces, splintered wood bobbing in the water like the remains of a shipwreck. This wasn't weather damage or natural wear. Someone had taken a sledgehammer to 100-year-old cypress planks with the precision of controlled demolition. My trail cameras had captured hooded figures working by flashlight at 3 in the morning, but the footage was just dark enough to avoid identifying faces. Professional sabotage designed to cause maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. The dock that Earl's grandfather had built by hand was now kindling scattered across my lake, but the property damage was just the opening act. That same week, I found 3 sections of my cattle fence cut with wire cutters, leaving gaps wide enough for my horses to escape onto the county highway. Only quick thinking and luck prevented a disaster that could have killed both animals and drivers. The cuts were surgical, exactly the right height and spacing to look like accident-prone cattle while ensuring maximum danger. The anonymous note tucked under my truck's windshield that Thursday made the threat explicit. "Accidents happen to stubborn people who don't know when to quit. Smart folks recognize when they're beat and move on before things get worse." The financial warfare escalated beyond harassment into systematic destruction of my business operations. My insurance company, the same one I'd paid faithfully for 15 years, suddenly canceled my policy, citing ongoing legal disputes and elevated risk factors. Without insurance, I couldn't legally operate heavy equipment, transport livestock, or even allow visitors on the property. The county tax assessor appeared the next day with a reassessment that tripled my property taxes overnight. My ranch that had been valued at agricultural rates for decades was suddenly classified as commercial recreational facility, requiring business-level taxation. The bill would consume every penny of ranch income and force me to choose between paying taxes or feeding my family. Dwight Blackstone filed a lien against my property for legal fees and damages, claiming $50,000 in costs for defending against my frivolous counter-complaints. A lien that would prevent me from selling, refinancing, or using the property as collateral for loans to fight their legal assault. The social warfare reached new levels of cruelty when Cordelia targeted my family directly. Savannah came home from school with tears streaming down her face and grass stains on her clothes from being pushed down during lunch. The bullying had escalated from whispered comments to physical confrontation. "Dad, they're saying you're dangerous because of your army stuff," Savannah sobbed in my arms, while the smell of her strawberry shampoo mixed with my own helpless rage. "Kids are calling me the crazy soldier's daughter and saying I might snap too." Diane faced professional sabotage when anonymous complaints reached her school district claiming our unstable home environment made her unfit to teach children. The principal, a good man caught in an impossible situation, had to formally document the complaints and begin an investigation that could end her teaching career. "They're trying to destroy everything we've built," Diane said that night, her voice hollow with exhaustion as she graded papers under our kitchen light. "Our home, our income, our daughter's future, your reputation, they want to erase us completely." Multiple lawsuits hit like artillery fire from different directions, designed to overwhelm our ability to respond. Environmental violations in county court, zoning disputes in municipal court, harassment claims in civil court, and criminal trespassing charges in justice court. Each required separate attorneys, separate filings, separate court appearances during our busiest ranch season. But while Cordelia and Dwight orchestrated their legal blitzkrieg, my team was conducting quiet counterintelligence that would have made my Army unit proud. Rita had discovered that every recent violation traced back to complaints filed by shell companies connected to the Marina development. The paper trail led straight back to their fraud conspiracy. Dr. Jake documented the environmental damage caused by their illegal dock construction. Concrete runoff contaminating the very lake they claimed to protect, heavy machinery destroying natural vegetation, construction debris scattered across pristine shoreline. Their environmental protection was actually environmental destruction. Buck's network identified the Marina company's financial backers, a group of Dallas investors who had no idea their money was secured by fraudulent collateral. When these investors learned the truth about the illegal land claims, they'd demand immediate loan repayment or face their own fraud liability. The community was fracturing along clear battle lines. HOA residents, increasingly uncomfortable with the escalation, were privately expressing concerns about their leadership's extreme tactics. Several families had approached me quietly to apologize and offer whatever help they could provide. "Mr. Thornfield," Mrs. Henderson said, when she stopped by with homemade cookies and worried eyes, "most of us never wanted this war. We just wanted peaceful neighbors. What they're doing to your family isn't right." But the pressure was becoming unbearable. Legal bills had exceeded $15,000. Lost work time was affecting ranch operations. The stress was triggering my military PTSD symptoms, making sleep difficult and concentration nearly impossible. That Friday night, sitting on what remained of my dock with the sound of their construction equipment humming across the water, I realized we were exactly where they wanted us, broken, desperate, and ready to surrender at any price. 43 days until their loan payment was due. 43 days to turn their desperation against them. The final gambit came disguised as salvation. A letter arrived on expensive letterhead from Lone Star Property Solutions, a company I'd never heard of, offering to purchase my ranch for $200,000. Cash, quick closing, no inspections required, $200,000 for property worth at least $800,000. The insult burned worse than touching a branding iron, but the mini twist that made my hands shake with rage was buried in the fine print. The purchasing company's registered agent was Marcus Blackstone, Cordelia's brother and owner of the Marina Development Company. They were trying to buy my land at foreclosure prices while simultaneously destroying my ability to refuse. Brilliant if you're into criminal conspiracy as a business model. The same week, Dwight made what he probably thought was a generous offer during a chance encounter at the feed store. With Buck pretending to organize inventory while actually recording every word, Dwight laid out his proposal with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. "Garrett, I can make all these legal issues disappear," he said, his voice carrying the oily smoothness of a snake oil salesman. "Sign over lake access rights and we'll drop every lawsuit, clear the liens, even throw in $50,000 cash for your trouble. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience. Lake access rights, not the full property, just legal access to use my lake for their marina development. They wanted me to voluntarily hand over what they couldn't steal through fraud, legitimizing their entire scheme with my own signature." The corruption web extended deeper than we'd imagined. Rita's investigation revealed that County Commissioner Bradley Morrison had received $25,000 in consulting fees from the Marina Company just weeks before my zoning violations mysteriously appeared. The same commissioner who'd fast-tracked every environmental complaint against my property while ignoring illegal construction permits next door. "Government corruption is like termites," Rita explained, her voice carrying the disgust of someone who'd spent 30 years watching honest public service. "Once it gets into the structure, it spreads until the whole system is compromised." The smear campaign escalated to outright character assassination. Anonymous social media profiles began spreading rumors about my military service, claiming PTSD made me dangerous to the community. Fake Facebook accounts shared doctored photos showing my ranch as an environmental disaster zone, filled with debris that had actually been dumped by their construction crews. The local newspaper ran an editorial, supposedly written by concerned citizens, questioning whether unstable veterans should be allowed to own large properties near family neighborhoods. The piece never mentioned my name directly, but every detail clearly referenced my situation. Professional sabotage reached industrial levels when someone contaminated my cattle feed with broken glass. Only careful inspection prevented a disaster that could have killed my entire herd. The veterinary bills for testing every animal consumed money I couldn't spare, but losing the cattle would have meant losing the ranch. My horse trailer tires were slashed 3 separate times, always on nights before I needed to transport livestock. The pattern was designed to look like random vandalism while ensuring maximum disruption to ranch operations. Each incident required expensive emergency tire service and delayed critical business activities. The physical intimidation escalated beyond property damage to personal threats. Trucks would speed past my ranch entrance, honking and shouting obscenities, always carefully timed when Savannah was walking to the school bus. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe, not even my family's daily routines. Trail cameras captured the same vehicles repeatedly, a black pickup truck and gray SUV registered to HOA board members. But the drivers wore masks and hoodies, making identification impossible while establishing a clear pattern of stalking and harassment. My team was documenting everything with military precision. Every threat, every act of sabotage, every corrupt government action was cataloged with dates, photos, and witness statements. Our evidence file had grown to over 300 pages of systematic criminal activity. The banking crisis was approaching like a financial hurricane. Marina company loan payments were 30 days overdue, triggering penalty clauses that increased their debt by $50,000. Bank representatives had begun demanding explanations for the discrepancies between loan applications and actual property ownership. Federal banking investigators, triggered by Rita's fraud complaint, had opened an official inquiry into fraudulent collateral claims. The same loan documents that had seemed like ironclad leverage were now evidence of federal crimes carrying prison sentences. Community support was crystallizing into organized resistance. Local businesses were openly supporting our family, posting signs declaring, "We support property rights," and "No HOA bullying." The feed store had become an unofficial headquarters for ranchers organizing legal expense fundraising. Even some HOA residents were beginning to revolt. 3 families had demanded a special meeting to remove Cordelia from leadership, questioning how their community fees were being used to fund legal harassment of neighbors. The beautiful thing about desperate criminals, Dr. Jake observed while reviewing our evidence collection, is they always overreach. They get so focused on the prize, they forget to cover their tracks. 28 days until loan default would trigger automatic foreclosure proceedings. 28 days until their entire fraud scheme collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. But first, they were planning one final assault. Construction equipment was mobilizing for what looked like a major operation. Whatever they were planning, it was going to be big, public, and probably their biggest mistake yet. The county commissioner meeting that Tuesday night was packed tighter than a cattle car, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls like witnesses to a public execution. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with courthouse disinfectant, while TV news crews set up cameras and the local newspaper photographer tested his flash. Cordelia had orchestrated this moment like a Broadway production. She'd filled the front rows with HOA supporters wearing matching blue shirts that read, "Protect our community." Their confident smiles and coordinated presentation materials screamed victory celebration before the first word was spoken. I sat in the back with Diane, Savannah, and our supporters, ranch families in work clothes and muddy boots, looking like David facing Goliath with nothing but truth and righteous anger. Commissioner Morrison called the meeting to order, his voice carrying the nervous energy of a man who knew his bribery was about to be exposed on live television. First item is a community safety presentation from the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. Cordelia approached the podium like a prosecutor presenting an airtight case, her designer outfit and professional demeanor commanding the room's attention. She projected photos on the courthouse screen showing my property from every conceivable angle. "Distinguished commissioners," she began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity, "we're here tonight to address a serious public safety threat affecting our entire community. Mr. Thornfield's dangerous ranch operations have created environmental hazards, violated zoning laws, and threatened the safety of families and children." She was good. Professional presentation binders, official-looking environmental reports, testimony from concerned citizens about noise, pollution, and property value destruction. For 20 minutes, she painted me as a reckless environmental criminal who belonged in prison rather than on a working ranch. "We respectfully request immediate county intervention to force compliance with community standards and environmental protection laws," she concluded, her confidence so thick you could cut it with a knife. The applause from her supporters was thunderous. Commissioner Morrison nodded gravely and asked if anyone else wished to address the matter. Several HOA residents stood to echo Cordelia's concerns, each reading from carefully prepared statements that sounded like they'd been written by the same attorney. Then I stood up. "Commissioner Morrison, "I'd like to respond to these allegations," I said, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom with military bearing that made people sit up straighter. I walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder, looking nervous and defeated, exactly the image they expected. "I understand the community's concerns about my property, and I want to apologize for any problems I may have caused." Cordelia visibly relaxed, her smile spreading like sunrise. She thought I was surrendering. The HOA supporters exchanged satisfied glances. Commissioner Morrison looked relieved that his corruption wouldn't be exposed after all. "Which is why I'm confused about this," I continued, opening my folder and projecting the first document onto the screen. The courthouse gasped collectively as the Marina company's loan application appeared in full display. $2.3 million, secured by fraudulent collateral, using my property as security for debt I'd never authorized. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a construction loan taken out by Cordelia Blackstone's brother, using my lake as collateral without my knowledge or consent. Federal banking fraud." The room erupted like a disturbed hornet's nest. Commissioner Morrison's face went white as fresh paint. Cordelia's confident smile collapsed into panic as she realized her entire scheme was being exposed on live television. Document by document, I systematically destroyed their lies. Forged environmental assessments exposed by real state officials, video evidence of trespassing and illegal dock construction, text messages showing Cordelia's written admission of harassment campaigns. "Here's Ms. Blackstone's text message from last week," I said, projecting her own words onto the screen. Quote, "We'll make life impossible until you sell. Smart people know when they're beaten." End quote. The criminal evidence hit like artillery fire. Banking fraud documents, county corruption, bribes to Commissioner Morrison documented in bank records, conspiracy evidence showing systematic fraud across multiple counties with other victims. Sheriff's deputies who'd been standing quietly along the walls stepped forward with arrest warrants that had been sealed until this moment. Federal banking investigators emerged from the crowd, their badges glinting under courthouse lights. "Cordelia Blackstone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, and criminal harassment," Deputy Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a lawman finally arresting actual criminals instead of harassing honest ranchers. The HOA supporters scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Commissioner Morrison was led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every humiliating moment. Dwight Blackstone tried to flee through the back exit, but found federal agents waiting. Mrs. Henderson stood up from the HOA section, her voice shaking with emotion. "Mr. Thornfield, on behalf of the neighbors who were deceived by these people, we owe you an apology. What they did to your family was criminal, and we should have stopped it sooner." The standing ovation started with the ranch families and spread through the entire courthouse. Even some HOA residents were applauding, finally free to show their true feelings about the harassment campaign. "Oh, and Commissioner Morrison," I called out as the deputies led him away, "I bought your Marina assets at the foreclosure auction this afternoon. $50,000 for the whole operation." The perfect irony. 8 minutes from arrest warrants to completed purchase. Their greed had destroyed them, and justice had been served with a side of poetic retribution. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my rebuilt dock watching the sunrise paint the water gold while my coffee steams in the crisp morning air. The sound of hammering echoes across the lake, but this time it's construction I actually want. Buck Martinez and his crew finishing the new accessibility ramp for disabled veterans. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mixes with lake mist and the distant aroma of Diane's breakfast bacon. Justice moved faster than a Texas thunderstorm once the evidence went public. Cordelia and Dwight were convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and criminal harassment. 2 years in federal prison each, plus $2.3 million in restitution that bankrupted them completely. Their pristine Range Rover got repoed while they were in court. The sound of that tow truck winch was sweeter than church bells on Sunday morning. Commissioner Morrison got 3 years for corruption and was permanently banned from holding public office. The FBI investigation expanded statewide, uncovering similar schemes in 7 other counties. Turns out, stealing people's property through fraudulent loans and government corruption was the Blackstone family business model. The HOA underwent a complete transformation worthy of a reality TV makeover. New leadership, new bylaws, and a written policy prohibiting harassment of neighbors. They even published a formal apology in the county newspaper, acknowledging their leadership had committed crimes while expressing newfound respect for property rights. Mrs. Henderson was elected the new HOA president, and her first official act was organizing a community barbecue right here at the ranch. Watching former enemies flip burgers next to my cattle pond while kids splashed in the shallow end was like witnessing a miracle of human decency served with potato salad. My family emerged stronger than steel cable. Savannah returned to school with hero status, the girl whose family stood up to bullies and won against impossible odds. She's planning to study agricultural law in college, inspired by what she calls the most epic legal smackdown in Texas history. Diane got promoted to assistant principal after her crisis management skills during our ordeal impressed everyone from the school board to the state education department. The Marina facilities I'd purchased at foreclosure became the foundation for something that would make Earl's ghost smile with pride. We converted the dock into a family recreation center with wheelchair accessibility for disabled veterans. The boat ramp now serves local families who want to fish but don't own waterfront property, exactly what a community resource should be. Our ranch operations expanded beyond cattle to include wedding venues, corporate retreats, and educational tours for school groups. The infamous lake that started this whole mess now generates steady income while staying true to its agricultural heritage. Sometimes the best revenge is just proving you can build something better than your enemies ever dreamed possible. But the real victory was the social good that emerged from our fight like flowers growing from scorched earth. We established the Veterans Memorial Fishing Dock, dedicated to service members struggling with PTSD and trauma. The quiet therapy of sunrise fishing has helped more wounded warriors heal than any government program ever could. The Neighbors Helping Neighbors Scholarship Fund provides college money for rural students pursuing agricultural education. Last year, we sent 3 kids to Texas A&M, including Buck Martinez's granddaughter who wants to study sustainable ranch management. Education defeating ignorance, one scholarship at a time. Rita opened a consulting business helping property owners fight HOA fraud, using our case as the gold standard for exposing systematic harassment. She's already helped 12 families across Texas defeat similar schemes, proving that one victory can create ripples of justice that spread for generations. The annual Neighbors Helping Neighbors Festival has become a regional tradition, celebrating community cooperation over suburban warfare. This year we're expecting over 2,000 visitors to enjoy local food, live music, and demonstrations that prove rural and suburban families can thrive together. Legal reform followed our victory like dominoes falling in exactly the right direction. State legislation now requires HOA financial transparency and criminal background checks for board members. Banks must verify collateral ownership before approving construction loans. The Blackstone loophole, as lawyers call it, is permanently closed. Standing here on my dock, watching cattle graze peacefully while families enjoy the recreation facilities that emerged from our legal war, I can smell victory in the morning air mixed with hay and hope. The best victories aren't about defeating enemies. They're about building something better from the ashes of their failed schemes. Your property rights matter, folks. Don't let anyone steal them through intimidation, fraud, or fancy legal-sounding nonsense. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when the fight seems impossible. But when good people unite against corruption, justice has a way of winning in the end. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments. You're not alone in this fight. Hit subscribe to Karen's Stories for more tales about standing up to corrupt systems, because next week I'm telling you about the building inspector who messed with the wrong contractor and lived to regret every minute of it.